The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For AZPM, I'm Mark McLemore, and this is Arizona Spotlight. Coming up, what's the start of a new school year like at the Tucson School for the Blind? Author and filmmaker Marquez Price talks about creating a documentary about his dad and his uncle's 1969 high school basketball triumphs. It's called The Backcourt. And the true story of how a young family made a new life for themselves in Arizona and ended up testing both their strength and love. Those stories are next on Arizona Spotlight. After months of preparation, the new private nonprofit Tucson School for the Blind has had its first week of classes and their first field trip for the school's 15 students. Following the closure of the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind and the separation of blind and deaf students, a former music teacher at ASDB created a space for the blind students to learn in the heart of downtown. 3 certified teachers have begun practices that attempt to make learning fun and rewarding. Thatcher Warwick-Hess has been following the first few weeks with the students and the teachers inside and outside the classroom.
Anticipation was building up on August 3rd in downtown Tucson. 15 students came into a 4,200 square foot classroom on the 3rd floor of an office building down Stone Avenue. Over the past 2 months, director Kate Scally-Howell has been transforming the space to accommodate students with blindness, low vision, and students with multi-disabilities.
I'm so grateful for all of my co-founders, the teachers who are here. They were 100% in. They always responded back, and also they're all really, really good collaborators.
Teacher and collaborator Laura Prelsnick-Aragon says she likes to integrate academic lessons into everyday life.
As much as we can generalize concepts, the better, which is why being downtown is so helpful, is that we can go out and take a concept that we're practicing here in class and go out and try it someplace else, and immediately you start to generalize that skill.
There are 4 teachers on staff. 3 of them are certified teachers of the visually impaired. Each of them have their own style of teaching. Kimberly Dotseth incorporates a cleaning ritual with a student right after lunch, incorporating daily living skills in the classroom.
I found the plug.
Okay. Then you got to come over here and find the outlet. Come behind it.
Dotseth is helping Enrique Lomelli vacuum the floor.
So we build it into our day. It's part of the expanded core curriculum that they learn, those daily living skills, and they practice them regularly as part of being independent after they graduate.
With the crumbs from lunch cleaned off of the floor, Enrique walked with Dotseth's class for read aloud time.
So we're going to listen to a story called First Day Jitters, all right? First Day Jitters. Enrique, what do you think this book is about?
It's about the first day of school.
Ooh, first day of school. That's a good guess. Sarah, dear, time to get out of bed, Mr. Hartwell said.
At the end of the book, it turns out the person who was nervous was the classroom's new teacher.
Did you guys know that teachers get nervous on their first day, too?
Yep.
Yeah?
Were you nervous on your first day of here?
Yes, I was. I was. And I've been teaching for 11 years, and I was still nervous on my first day.
Because you didn't know this place a little, how this place was going to work out, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Dotseth assigned the students to write an essay about first day jitters. Lomelli pulled out a brailler, which looks similar to a typewriter, but is specifically designed for blind students as it embosses the paper in braille.
My first day of school.
Look at that. Look at you using all your contractions and reading. Beautiful.
TSB Director Scally-Howell says the benefits of having indoor and outdoor instruction is paramount. On the first Friday of school, students lined up to leave for a field trip.
Yeah, we're going to the library. Yeah, we figured our first one, we wouldn't go super far. So it's also really hot outside, so we don't want to walk very far.
Scally-Howell worked as a music teacher for 15 years at the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind. After she was laid off in March, she decided to take action, despite never having the experience of running a school. ASDB's plan was to send students with blindness and low vision into the Tucson Unified School District while their deaf peers would relocate to Oro Valley. But many families of the visually impaired looked to alternatives for fear of bullying and insufficient resources in the traditional public school system. This summer, Scally Howell worked with parents, organizations, board members, and city officials to get the school up and running. Other teachers who were let go, like Prelsnick Aragon, joined Scally Howell, and she led the class to the library next door.
Okay. When we exit the building, we are turning right. Trail the right-hand side of the building, please.
How did you get there so fast?
Keep sweeping, because there's a pole in front of you, kiddo.
Found it.
So we are in the lobby of the public library. Okay, there's a lot of different areas here, so I'm just going to give you a verbal layout.
The TSB teachers instructed students on how and where to use their canes along the aisles of books. 9-year-old Araceli Peach walked around the graphic novel section.
I'm 9.5.
9.5. What do you think of the library so far?
I really like it.
Really awesome.
I'm almost 10.
Wow,
My birthday's in 2 months.
that's awesome. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Other students noticed a banner about the library's temporary closure and move. One student asked if the move was similar to the one at ASDB. Multiple disabilities teacher Iris Vela talked about what that moment meant for her students afterwards.
And of course, they might have associated library with ASDB library, where I came in and there was some rocking chairs and tables, but this was different. There was other people and things like that. And so the experiences are really what helps them understand what a concept really is, or a place or an activity, and then they can relate to those things.
From daily chores to incidental learning and direct conceptual takeaways, the teachers at TSB want to balance their different teaching methods.
Part of the reason why we feel that this school is so necessary in having such a specialized environment is because the amount of time that is needed to do those things is not always something that can be done in a typical school day. Right?
Every Friday at TSB will be a community field trip day. Scally Howell said that she hopes they will go to the YMCA in September. Every Wednesday, the students will also go to Playformance, an indoor playground in downtown Tucson.
So truly trying to make those connections, not for them, but try to get them to branch out further than just their little bubble is really important for me, at least.
From Arizona Spotlight, I'm Thatcher Warwick-Hess.
We have a link to more of the ongoing story of the Arizona School for the Blind on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. The Backcourt, a 2025 book from Tucson-based author, poet, publisher, and entrepreneur Marquez Price, documents a story that began before he was born and one that will continue far into the future. It tells about the intertwining bonds of family, friendship, and teamwork, using the story of his father Delano Price and his teammate Hoagie Simmons, and how they led the 1969 championship basketball season for Tucson High. I have gotten to know Marquez Price as a guest over the years, as a carefully spoken and almost shy artist. So I started by asking him about becoming a focused interviewer for the documentary, including asking deep questions of both his mom and his dad.
I just looked at it as people that I know on an intimate level every day for my entire life. And I think I was able to draw from my experience as an interviewer through a podcast that I did a couple years ago. So I was able to slip back into that, area of expertise, and it was able to flow naturally as opposed to in a studio when you have a microphone and, these gaudy headphones. It kind of makes you more careful, of what you're saying, meticulous. So,
yeah, you were able to really probe your guests and get some very heartfelt answers, including out of your own mother.
Oh, yeah, she's the quintessential mother, and I think I'm split between her and my father as far as my mannerisms. What you see here in the studio, more shy, that's my mother. But my father, he likes to grandstand, and hey, the cameras are on me, so I think you're able to see a little of that element in the documentary.
I learned a lot about your dad, Delano Price.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot about Hoagie Simmons,
Yes.
who is essentially your uncle in every way that matters.
Mm-hmm.
What's a way you would contrast their personalities? How do you think they fit together so well as friends and have for these decades?
Well, it was easy for me just growing up in their shadow, examining the dichotomy. They're so opposite of each other, but, as the saying goes, opposite attracts. So that's what I was able to draw from a lot of times, and just studying their personalities, and then just how their bond was rooted in basketball and other, aspects of life. I was able to separate them and just examine both sides of the spectrum with immense clarity. And that's where I was able to kind of laser in on the project.
At the beginning, you say you started off thinking that this was a playground basketball story.
Mm-hmm.
And then very quickly it's unveiled that this is actually a story that connects to many aspects of American culture, but more specifically to Black American culture.
Mm-hmm.
When was it for you that kind of like awakening of realizing that you could do a story about two guys who loved to play ball, but you had something that connected to so many other trends and modes of living in the modern world?
Well, just approaching the book, going back to before they were even born, as far as the lineage up until now. They're both in their 70s. So I always looked at it as like an odyssey, their story. And you have the social commentary that's intertwined in the basketball aspect of the story. It's almost like how I describe the book. It's a basketball rendition of Forrest Gump, because you have these people that they met, these things that they approached throughout their lives, and the social commentary of what was going on in American and, Black culture as well.
Describe the multimedia nature of what the Backcourt has become, because when I first interviewed you last year, this was a memoir about your family. It was a new kind of writing style for you as your fifth book. It was the first time you had attempted something like this. And now all of a sudden I find out it's blown up into other media and become an entirely different project.
Basketball is so universal, and just being immersed in the artist and creative community here in Tucson, having access and proximity to so many different people who are talented, I said, well, I want to do something musically. So I said, let's make a soundtrack. Or I know some engineers, so I said, I want to record the book, the audiobook version. And then, hey, I know videographers, photographers, let's do a documentary. So I wanted to distinguish myself within that story. Just those kind of eureka moments where it's like, wow, there's so much more to, this story. And that's when I knew I had to expand it beyond the borders of a basketball court.
And what made the season of 1969 such a standout?
1969, just in pop culture, what was going on. And it was the last season that Tucson High has won a state championship in basketball. This past season, they got pretty close. They got to the Final Four, but that was the last time in decades. So I just think that it being carved in stone as far as an accomplishment, an achievement, that made it really special, because they set so many records that still hold to this day as well.
And what about your decision to include Bryce Cotton in the documentary?
Bryce Cotton actually grew up in the neighborhood, Sugar Hill, a predominantly Black neighborhood here in Tucson, Arizona, where my father and Hoagie Simmons met. And he grew up there. He was born and raised. So he's pretty much the new, version of the Backcourt to carry on the tradition of it. So him going on and, starring collegiately at Providence University, and then going and having stints in the NBA, and now playing overseas in Australia and being like what they've coined him as like the LeBron James of the NBL. I had to have him a part of this project because he's in the book as well.
And when you do live events where you invite your father and Hoagie to participate,
Mm-hmm.
do you see people coming up to them starry-eyed?
Absolutely. That's where this story started. I'd witnessed a lot when I was a kid, but it really impacted me, by the time I reached college, and I was still having people come to me and, tell me stories about how great they were, what they saw them do and witnessed. And it was at that point it really started to, turn in my mind, like, someday I'm going to have to do something, with this story. And, some years, I'd probably say about 5 years later, I met one of my best friends through serendipity, a guy named Mike Luke. And how we met, he called and introduced himself. He wanted to do a story on my father and Hoagie Simmons. So just talking for an inordinate amount of hours and time that passed, that's when I got the confidence to say, you know what, I can write this story. I'm uniquely qualified to write it.
This is your fifth book. That's certainly nothing to sneeze at. There are many people who will never have a fifth book.
Yes.
But I do have to ask you, what's next? What's on your horizon?
A lot. I always reference Miles Davis. He was being interviewed one time, and they asked him where his genius comes from, his passion, and he said, it's always in my mind. It's in my mind right now. Matter of fact, I might leave this interview and go play the trumpet. So that's how I look at myself. There's always going to be a project. I literally have a notebook with my next 20 ideas, so I'm sure I'll be able to occupy myself for the next few years of my life.
Keep your eye on that notebook.
Yep.
Marquez, what do you want to tell our listeners about the event you've got coming up at the Loft?
Screening the documentary, and then I'm starting another campaign where I'm releasing a 4-part narrative that'll be available, the audiobook, the ebook, the documentary, and the soundtrack through a platform called Gumroad, where you can determine the value of the bundle and you can pay what you want. And from there, I'm planning to create a teleplay and a television series from the story, so I'm just going to keep expanding it.
Marquez Price presents the Backcourt documentary, Basketball's Best Kept Secret, at the Loft Cinema on Saturday, August 22nd at 3 p.m. There can be something very powerful about a single voice sharing a true story. It gives a chance for the storyteller to shine and forge new connections with anyone listening. In support of this important tradition, Arizona Spotlight features a different storyteller every month. Here's Tony Paniagua to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Mark. Our storyteller this month is Susanne Lasseter. She was born in Phoenix but graduated from Amphitheater High School in Tucson and attended the University of Arizona before moving away with her husband, who served in the military for several years. Eventually, they moved back to Tucson, and Lasseter returned to the U of A, where she finished her bachelor and master's degree in speech-language pathology, and then worked for Tucson Unified School District for more than 2 decades. Susanne Lasseter is a member of Tellers of Tales Tucson, and she encourages everyone to share their stories.
I'm Susanne Lasseter, and this is the story of how my grandparents came to Arizona. My mother's parents, Ruth and Dan Williams, were both born on farms near Fort Smith, Arkansas. And in December of 1917, when she was 17 and he was 18, they married, and they began their lives farming bottomland along the Arkansas River. The following September, their oldest daughter, Catherine, was born, and life was going fairly well. And it got even better when the U.S. signed the armistice on November 11th, 1918, ending World War I, and my grandfather's draft notice was canceled. Unfortunately, late in November, the 1918 flu epidemic hit the area. Now, my grandmother and Catherine got sick and recovered fairly well, but my grandfather remained ill, sick, running fevers, unable to get out of bed, lung infection after lung infection. And in the spring, he was still so ill that he could neither plow nor plant. The doctor told him that he probably only had 6 months to live, and his only option would be to go to a warm, dry climate. Advice so often given to people in the days before antibiotics. Dan and Ruth talked it over and decided to take their meager savings and invest in a train ticket for him to head west. He first got off in Paris, Texas, but he felt that it wasn't prosperous looking, it wasn't welcoming, so he got back on the train. And that's when he met the man who was the superintendent of construction for a company that was building the new high school in Mesa. The man took a shine to my grandfather, and when he found out that he had carpentry skills, he offered him a job. As they headed west and the climate became warmer and drier, my grandfather's breathing issues eased and his strength began to return. So by the time they got to Mesa, he was able to go to work. He got himself a room in a boarding house, and he wrote to my grandmother that he had gotten to Mesa, that he had gotten a job, he was feeling much better, and as soon as he had saved enough money, he would send her the money for the train fare, and she and Catherine could join him. Now, my grandmother was not one to just sit back and let things happen, and so she went to her father-in-law and said, if Dan only has 6 months to live, I can't see the two of us being separated. So would he advance her the money for a train ticket? And would he liquidate their farm, and then he could send them the proceeds minus the cost of the ticket? Well, he agreed. And then my 18-year-old grandmother with her 8-month-old daughter, without telling Dan anything at all, boarded the train and headed to Mesa. When she got there, she got herself a room in a boarding house, and her plan was that the next day she would go to the job site and see if she could find Dan. But what actually happened was that the next morning, Dan came out of his boarding house, headed to work down the sidewalk. And about 3 doors ahead of him, from another boarding house, emerged a young woman with gorgeous red hair and a baby on her shoulder. And she turned and headed the way he was going. Now, my grandfather never swore, but this is what he said when he told me the story. I thought to myself, damn, that looks like my wife. And damn, that looks like my kid. And then he called out, Ruth? And she turned around, and the young family had their reunion right there on the boardwalk in Mesa. They lived in Lehigh for about 2 years. Lehigh is now a suburb of Mesa, and he continued to work construction. And then they moved to Phoenix. They bought a house on North 16th Street, just south of Indian School Road, and there they had 3 more daughters, my mother being the youngest. Dan continued to work part-time construction and also part-time at the post office. And at night, he went to school trying to get his high school diploma. When he did get his degree, then he went to work full-time for the post office. And when he retired in 1956, he had achieved the title of Assistant Superintendent for Postal Finance. Not bad for a farmer turned carpenter and night school graduate. Well, after retirement, they decided that they would move back to Arkansas, and they bought a place about 10 miles from where both of them were born. And gentleman farmed 40 acres, raising his beloved Shetland ponies, and that's where they were living when they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1967.
Susanne Lasseter says she has done a fair amount of genealogy, and she recommends that you seek out your older relatives and ask them questions while they are still around to provide some answers. To learn more about Tellers of Tales Tucson or other storytelling organizations in our community, we'll have links on our website. For Arizona Spotlight, I'm Tony Paniagua.
The Substack, called In a Flash, is a magazine for creative nonfiction. They specialize in publishing stories of 500 words or less from writers around the world. In March, they chose to feature an essay by Liza Porter, an author and poet who calls Tucson home. In response to the one-word prompt rhythm, she wrote the following piece. And now here is Liza Porter with a reading.
And what about the way hope can suddenly appear out of nowhere, outside the kitchen window? A sparrow's nest falling to the ground. The tiny eggs you know are there somewhere, broken, and you can't see, but maybe the mother bird is teaching its babies to fly right now. Or to sing. That's when you can't ignore it. It's the longing that brings it on. The mourning doves coo louder than usual if you wait for the Air Force jets to stop their ear-numbing circles over the valley. And those other birds whose songs you don't recognize, can't name, take for granted. It doesn't matter that you can't call them by their names. What's important is the songs. You can't deny it any longer. Yearning seems to be the only way to know everything else. Despair, tears falling in yellow blossoms from the Palo Verde tree in a violent wind. Hope, the new seed sprouting in damp earth. The yearning always comes before the other. Take the way a fire truck siren lifts you right up out of your car on Broadway as it roars down the wrong side of the street, honking and screeching, and all the cars stop. And it's rush hour, and you love the way all the cars stop, everyone pulling together for once. For one moment on Broadway in the middle of rush hour, all the drivers quit what they're doing. The petty cell phone arguments, the right-wing talk shows, the so-called rock and roll drowning the day's crises, the bad news clips, one after another, it seems. Then someone else's bad luck makes the whole street pause. You hope they're all saying a prayer that no one is hurt, that help will get there in time. You hope they're not all just annoyed by the slowing down, that damn truck messing with their important plans, the mall where they can buy more things no one really needs, the gym, the bar. That's when you hear all the car stereos tuned to the same station, some throwback DJ on community radio dropping the needle onto an album. For Every Man, or Imagine, or even Beyonce's Freedom, and everyone starts to sing. Every person in every car knows the lyrics, beginning to end. When you look around, you can see their lips moving in unison through the tinted windows of their air-conditioned SUVs. Even the lawyers in their tailor-made suits sing. Even the surly teenagers wearing dog collars and all black, even the sleeping babies latched into car seats wake up and sing at the top of their lungs as the traffic starts moving again.
Liza Porter's most recent book of poetry is called Del Bach, available from Finishing Line Press. Thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM and is posted weekly at azpm.org. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
This has been an original production of AZPM News.